Good day, everyone, and welcome to NorthStar Online Talk. So happy to be here. Again, our commitment is to help be here to support people as they go through their recovery journey. Not here to tell you what to do, but we're certainly here to tell you about our experiences, about things we've done to recover and make our lives much better. So if you've been at this for a while, you understand what I'm talking about. If you're new to the recovery journey, hang in there. There's going to be tough times. You're going to suffer. But at the end of the day, it'll be worth it. You'll actually start to have a life that you only dreamt of. And so let's talk about, again, one of the things we talk about all the time here is trauma. I want to start with a quote, though. This is St. Augustine, who was one of the very, very early fathers of Christianity. And this is a quote he has, I think, for all of us. He said, "My soul is like a house, small for you to enter, but I pray you to enlarge it. It is in ruins, but I ask you to remake it. It contains much that you will not be pleased to see. This I know, and do not hide." And I think the part that's so important is this I know, and do not hide. That, oh my gosh, if we could, for many of us, we know this, if we would have just talked about the stuff we were going through, the things that we were experiencing, the problems we were having, the addictive behaviors and thinking, if we would have just talked about it, we could have done so much better. Life would have been so much better, so much. We would have recovered faster. All those things. So just remember, you don't have to be perfect here. All you gotta do is be willing to get better and better and better. And the process of recovery is well worth it, but it is tough. It is painful. And for many of us, we have to learn how to live differently without our addictive behaviors overtaking everything we do. We make sure we understand, again, addiction, or one of our favorite definitions by Margaret Paul, is addictive behavior to avoid emotional pain. Once you understand that, then addiction starts making more sense. You know, why was it that when you were 14, alcohol was so great for you? Why did you remember that, how wonderful you felt? It's because of all the stuff that was going on in your life and you just didn't understand at that time what it was. Or how about you became very promiscuous with people because you just wanted to be touched, you wanted to be loved, but it wasn't what that was, but at the time it felt like it was, and you look back and see how destructive that was. And you may still be doing that. You may still be in many broken relationships just because of all the stuff that happened to you as a child. But here's what's great. The one thing about recovery is addiction is a disease. It's one of the only diseases out there that if you recover, you're actually a better person than you were before you ever started. That's pretty big. That's pretty big to think about, but it's true. That's why I love working in recovery, because people who recover are so grateful and so thankful to be in a situation where they can learn to live again and learn to live the ways that they really want to. So it's really good. So let's think. So I'm going to read 2 Corinthians. Here's this Paul 7, and he goes, "And now isn't it wonderful all the ways in which this distress has goaded you closer to God? You're more alive, more concerned, more sensitive, more reverent, more human, more passionate, more responsible." I mean, think about that. Isn't that great? You looked at from any angle, you've come out of this with purity of heart. That's what happens when you recover. You appreciate life. You're grateful for the things you have, because there was so much at the time where you didn't have anything, but you had anything but nothing is what you had, because of all the destruction and you were just creating issues for everybody. And we don't have to be like that, but we have to take the risk. And trauma is such a big part of recovery, because almost every addict has trauma. Everybody has trauma. But to be addicted, I think it's a requirement, is that you either have significant trauma, significant abandonment, or significant child neglect. And they all kind of fit together, because as children, we oftentimes we didn't have the sophistication or the immaturity to understand that our parents had issues, and that was inflicted upon us. And again, I don't judge this, because I'm a parent, certainly have made mistakes. But the point is that even if that's true, you have to recover. It's your job to do that. And some of you've had trauma in your adult lives. You've had some very difficult times. So, it's one of those things. And so I like to break trauma into two categories. There's PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is usually a one-time event or a couple-time event, where maybe you came upon a car crash, saw mangled bodies. That would be a post-traumatic, you were traumatized by what you saw. The other one is complex PTSD, and that's where you had ongoing trauma that you were not able to escape. And that's what for many of us have. And that's what causes so much of our addictive behaviors, because of what it did to us. Trauma is just this insidious thing that just really creates a difference in us. This is a quote from Dr. Vanderkolk. After a trauma, the world is experienced with a different nervous system that has an altered perception of risk and safety. So the problem is we don't know that, right? And so there's kind of three responses to trauma. There's social engagement, where we go towards we try to engage with other people to help us get through it. There's fight or flight, and there's also freeze or collapse. And for many of us to get into addictive modes throughout our life because of all this, particularly complex PTSD, which is much more difficult to overcome, is that we learn to either just close down, or we don't take care of ourselves in so many ways, and we fall apart. But think about, for people who have had significant trauma and abandonment in their lives, it disconnects us from the world. So it's difficult to put that feeling of no longer being yourself into words, right? As a child, you never really knew anything else. And it's easier to describe others than ourselves. That's a sign of it. And this is a great quote here. The task of describing our most private experiences in trauma can be likened to reaching down a deep well to pick up small, fragile crystal figures while you are wearing thick leather mittens. And this is Jerome Kagan's quote. I mean, think about that. It's so true. We just, and trauma robs us. It robs us of the feelings that we're in charge of our lives. We don't feel that way anymore. We feel like we're victims, or we feel like bad things happen to us. We just begin to feel like we don't matter. We don't have the ability to do things. Our toxic shame takes over, and we never feel like we're enough. We feel like we're mediocre. And one of the things we have to do in trauma recovery is talk about it at pace we can, but assign good to it, because then that gives us some power to feel better about our life. And if we can assign something good to the trauma, then that's how we overcome trauma. And that's what Paul's talking about in Corinthians when he talks about we're better people now because of stuff we've been through. And it's certainly easier said than done. But we have to recover the ownership of our body, our mind, and our spirit, particularly those who had sexual abuse, emotional ongoing abuse. All the inability to get away is the key to a lot of the traumatic events we had that creates addiction in us. So we know what we feel and what we think without feeling overwhelmed, enraged, ashamed, numb, or collapsed. Could you imagine that? Actually feeling that after all these years of hiding the trauma, hiding the neglect, hiding the abandonment, being ashamed, blaming yourself for things that you had nothing to do with. And if you were a perpetrator, you're blaming yourself for things you did, you feel bad about, all those things, right? So again, a way to overcome this is we got to find ways, we got to talk about our trauma at the pace we can handle, and then we have to assign something good to it. That will reduce our secrecy and our shame. We need to remain calm, and we need to think about our triggers see triggers as part of the deal. This is a great study, it's University of Texas study. So there are three groups of students that tell you how trauma affects us. One group was asked to write about what was currently happening in their lives. One group asked to write the details of a traumatic event in their lives. And one group asked to recount the facts of their traumatic event, the facts, the details, etc. All were to write continuously for 15 minutes for 4 days in a row. So the result was there were 200 students, 65 reported childhood trauma. Some reported losing a close person. So losing a person close to them was the number one. The second one was 32% of those 65 wrote about sexual abuse trauma. Students who had been sexually abused reported more physical illness, averaging 1.7 days of hospitalization, almost double of those not reporting trauma. So we do here, right? But here's the thing. Here's what's important. After they did the study, after they did the experiment, student visits to the College Health Center dropped by almost 50% after the experiment. So the people in that group, the 200, of those percentage that had experienced childhood trauma, writing about it, talking about it, doing the details, dropped their visits to a hospital by 50% to the health center. Pretty big. And it tells us we have to talk about our traumas. We have to talk about the things that are deeply affecting us. And what we have to understand is that trauma, what we do is we develop strategies for self-protection. The problem is it doesn't always need to be there. And traumatic adaptations will continue until we find ways to put the memories to rest, right? So abandonment and trauma survivors are resilient, but they create destructive thinking. Think about the times when you're agitated, when rage comes out at inappropriate times, or you have passive surrendering to a real threat. You see yourselves as unlovable. You blame yourself for things that you're not responsible for. So it's hard. We have to figure this out. And so that's what I'm talking about the submarine commander super fast here. So the submarine commander is an analogy that, so when you're in a submarine, there's no windows, there's no doors, the only thing you ever hatches that are very, very locked down, or you'd all die from the pressure underwater. So a submarine commander can't just look out and go, oh, look out the window and see something's going on. All he can go by is the meters, the gauges, and the dials. That's what he can only see. And that's what he has to use to command his ship. Certainly there's periscopes, but you got to be pretty high, but most times submarines are way deeper in periscope level. So you have to go by what you see of the meters, gauges, and dials to tell you what's going on. And so what happens is one of the meters starts going up a little bit, or one of the dials starts changing, or the sonar starts telling us something. So I immediately start getting agitated. I go to DEFCON 2. And then I see stuff still going. I go and I keep feeding things out. So I go DEFCON 3, DEFCON 4. If I go DEFCON 5, which is I'm at war. Well, the thing is, you finally find out it wasn't any of that. There was a mountain chain about 4 miles ahead that we needed to go around. So you have to do that. You're not under attack. You have to manage it, and you have to go on. Well, that's us. So I'm driving down the road. I've had a traumatic event 10 years ago. I'm driving down the road and a song comes on that was popular when this traumatic event happened to me. I immediately, my meters, gauges, and dials start to kick in. My heart rate goes up. I start looking around. I become agitated, or I become scared, or I want to freeze, or I want to attack. Whatever it is we do in our moment. Well, we're not under danger. We're not under attack. It was 10 years ago. But the song triggered us. See, what we have to understand is our brain does not understand time, and our brain does not understand what reality is. It understands what we feed it. So here's what you got to understand. When we've been traumatized, our cortisol levels tend to be too high, our adrenaline tends to kick in too much, our dopamine levels are either too low or too high, all those things. We don't need to get real complicated with the chemistry, but the point is, cortisol, for instance, cortisol is designed to help us in an emergency situation. If I start to pull out in front of a big semi-trailer and I slam on my brakes just in time, my pulse is up, I'm scared, that's cortisol. It stopped me. It made me move my foot even faster to the brake and pushed on even harder. Cortisol was there to save me. But we're not made to live with cortisol at high levels. If we do, we go into agitation and rage and anger, self-protection. We then either freeze or we collapse, or we go and fight everybody. All that, none of that makes any sense. So our emotional floodgates are open, and with our cortisol levels too high, and then everything becomes a big issue when they're not. That's what we can understand as submarine commander. Understand your brain doesn't always understand what's going on. Your brain knows what you feed it. So when you feed your brain with extra cortisol, with extra adrenaline, it immediately assumes we're under attack and reverts to one of those three things of fighting, flight, freezing, collapsing, or engaging with people maybe we shouldn't, or we do too much of it. All it's built around our brain thinks we're under attack, and our brain develops those riverbeds to survival when we don't need to be. Now, if you're in a situation where you're still having CPTSD, you need to get out of there. You need to value yourself enough to move on. So I hope you understand this a little bit. So the submarine commander is an example of our subconscious, the parts that we're not necessarily aware of, but it certainly is there. We cannot stop triggers, but what we can do is we can get through the trigger. We can be aware of the trigger. We can say to ourselves things like, you know what, that happened 10 years ago. I just got to get through this. So think of a trigger as a wave hitting you. You're not going to stop the wave. You just got to get through it. Then you don't need to feel so bad about having the triggers once you understand, once you're aware of what trauma has done. Then that's what happens. You work on it. That's why at NorthStar we spend so much time on this. We have people in there telling us about traumatic events, some of them for the first time ever in their lives. You can just see the relief because they've now started to recognize. And then when they get triggered, they don't overreact so much. You're still going to get triggered. I wish I could tell you you're not. I don't think you can stop triggers, but you certainly can manage them. And the more you look at them, the more you look at your trauma, I think the less often your triggers hit and maybe the less pervasive they are. So it's just a matter of understanding that. So we are fortunate to be in recovery because we're going to be better people than we ever were. Some of the greatest people on the planet are people in recovery because we live with gratitude, we live with purpose. We want people to get well just like we have become, and it's a great thing. So how do you overcome trauma? You got to talk about it at the pace you can. Come to support groups. Hear other people's stories. You're going to be surprised how much of your story is in other people. Try to sign and figure out ways to assign good to it. It's so important you can do that. Another thing you need to do is you need to make your gratitude lists. There's just something about it. I don't know how else to say it. And I think there's a physiological reaction that I think helps curb the survival physiological reactions we get too much of. Now, if you're in a dangerous situation, please, you need to be cortisol driven, but most of us don't have that. Most of us from day to day are not under attack. Most of us are not experiencing trauma. We may be feeling some abandonment, things like that, but on the whole, our lives were not in danger. We may not be where we want to be. We may not be being as successful as we want to be, whatever it is. But you got to discern the difference between be real trauma, real danger, and what's our past. And we can do something about the past, but you got to do it. You can't just feel bad for yourself and be angry and take it on everybody else. You need to connect with people. Come and hear other people in support groups such as NorthStar, where we talk a lot about this, so people can overcome it and feel strength and just bring themselves back to who they really are. So I appreciate you joining me today. And again, we meet on Wednesdays and Fridays at 6:30. We have childcare, so you bring your kids. They need to be at least 4, so before we take them, or maybe 3. But diaper change, we don't want to do that. We provide you food, full meals. Tonight we're going to have Mexican. We're going to have tacos. So anyway, we feed you. We have childcare and feed you. So there's 2 reasons for you that you may use excuses not to come that you can. Because your survival brain's going to tell you not to talk about it. Your survival brain's going to tell you not to heal. Your survival brain's going to tell you to fight back or to freeze or to run. None of those work. But you're safe here. At NorthStar, you're safe. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to overwhelm you, but we are going to listen to you, and we can help you out a little bit. So anyway, I hope you come here sometime. If you don't live here locally, you can email me at csimpson@wgva.church. So again, I appreciate you joining us. And I hope this was helpful to you. And remember, your brain is a submarine commander. It doesn't understand reality. It doesn't understand time near as much as you think it does. So you can use that to help get your brain going where it needs to be. Thank you for joining me. And let's close with the prayer of serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. again, thank you for joining us. And if you ever want to reach out, email me at csimpson@wgva.church. Thank you.